Nic Bonner.
Morning, can you hear me?
I can. Good morning. Welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Congratulations on this. This is awesome. I'm glad you're doing this.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a challenge for me to overcome.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, man, it's been a minute since we last spoke. I think like a year ago now, and many years since we last hung out and rode.
Yeah,
So
right.
so it's really interesting how that works. But I know like you and I have been on some like interesting paths and some. I want to dive into all that. But yeah, how have you been?
For sure. Good, man. Good. Just super busy, kind of going through my own stuff and been good though. Especially with the state of the world and everything going on, like holding it together pretty good.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I know there's some weird times right now, some interesting times. People are handling it in different ways, but I'm
Right.
glad that we get to connect because I saw it was about a week ago. I just was going through. You made a Facebook post about being grateful and perspective, and it was with riding, and I was like, man, like we just gotta hop on a podcast and then just have a conversation because I think you and I think similarly, and we obviously have this similar background with BMX that's led us to different places in our lives, and before we get into all that, do you want to take a moment just to kind of give the rundown of who Nic Bonner is?
Sure, man. Yeah, actually, I've listened to some of your talks, and we have like a very similar history with BMX and just kind of how we grew up. Like, I grew up similar to you. Like, I grew up riding. Actually, grew up playing soccer for the first like about 5 years old to 15 years old. I played soccer, and I was pretty dedicated to that. And then as soon as I kind of figured out what BMX was around the age of 13, it just kind of took over. And I quit soccer. I quit doing everything, quit kind of hanging out with the same friends, ended up meeting BMXers, and just took over after that part. It's all I could think about. So for about 20 years or so after that, it's kind of been all over the place, riding bikes all over the place, and kind of a mix between riding bikes and then just kind of spiritually figuring out what's going on with everything at the same time. I think like with you too, like riding BMX is giving you an opportunity to kind of live against the grain, so to speak, and like society standards. Like we didn't have a conventional job or go to college and do the whole career path thing. So riding BMX has kind of given me an opportunity to kind of like sit down and think about what's going on with everything and how I want to react to everything in life. And yeah, kind of just been doing that off and on for a long time now. And BMX has definitely been like a, kind of in the forefront of everything, driving it.
Yeah, I say that like BMX was like the catalyst to like who I am today, and at least the way I think today, because I think BMX was an extension of who I am, which I think you can relate to that. It's funny because when people talk
For
about
sure.
like, who are you? People are like, well, I'm this and that. It's usually job or career related or just something like that. And it's funny because who I am is what led me to doing what I've done in my past and what I do today. And it's funny because that path that we took, it connected us. I think I was 16, no, 17 when I first met you. It was with Brandon Christie. We were in Boston for New Year's Eve doing a BMX show. And that was the
Yeah,
first
yeah.
time I had seen you ride in person, first time I'd hung out with you. I want to say it was the first time I had ever heard of you at the time. Because when I was like 16, 17, I was still getting into like the actual scene or culture of BMX beyond just who I saw on TV. And I was just like, my first impression of you, I think you did like a three suicide practice or something over the box, and I was just like, "What the hell?" And like you were doing like tooth the bars in the quarter, and it was just awesome. Do you remember? Do you remember that event?
A little bit, yeah. I remember that. I remember that box jump was like a fraction of the size of the normal one. I think it was like 4 feet tall and like so crazy small that yeah, it was definitely difficult to ride. But I saw you ride at that time, and you were 16 or 17, and you were already doing double whips. And I was like, I don't think I could do them at that point. So I was like blown away. I was like, who's this kid come on here? And kind of the same thing. Like I hadn't heard of you. Like it's crazy because like BMX is such a small knit group of guys. Like I grew up in Colorado where I knew all the Colorado guys, but as soon as you leave the state, you know, if you weren't on the internet back then, especially, you know, you didn't know anybody in New Hampshire or the Northeast that rode. So it's kind of introduced me to you and Brandon Christie. Like, all right, there's some good riders everywhere now.
Yeah, it's interesting
So
because
it's
like right
really cool.
now with social media and stuff, like I remember back then BMX forums were just starting to become really popular, and like YouTube was just coming out, and I don't even know if it was out yet. maybe like 2006,
Yeah,
2007. And that was actually my first show I'd ever ridden.
no kidding.
Yeah, it was funny. I was like super nervous, and then I was like, oh, these guys are all really good. um, but yeah, it's
That's
interesting
funny.
because
Didn't know that.
how yeah that was my first show, but that's where we first met. And then I want to say it was like 2 years later, maybe not even, that we were in Canada. I want to say you, Brian
Yeah.
Hunt, and I doing some, I forget what the event was. I just remember like us, we were staying at this house or this apartment, and it was like you, B Hunt, and I don't know if Brandon was on that trip or not, but I remember you were I want to say you were talking about writing a book back then, or you were writing something.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was Newfoundland. It was me,
Yes.
you, and B Hunt, and Chris, and I want to say somebody else, but yeah, that was an awesome trip. That was like the first trip me and you really got to go on and really spend time together on the road. Um, and that was a crazy. That was for that motocross. It was like indoor motocross
Yep.
at Pepsi Center and BMX. Um, yeah, that was a good trip. And then kind of getting to know. It's kind of crazy, like when you see people ride and you ride with them, but like getting to know someone on the road is like a whole different experience when you actually like are staying with a hotel with them and traveling, like you're with them 24/7. So they become family like instantly. So I always like that aspect of it, going on the road with someone and like getting to know them where in normal life you would never get to know them like that. So
Yeah, I always find that that's like a really cool attribute of BMX. Like you click with people right away. Like I've invited people to come back when I was living in Greenville, come live with me, like live or stay with me at my house for like a week. We just met at a
yeah,
contest where we were at a park and we met, and I was like, we just, you click and you're like, oh man, like you got to come out and stay with me and ride out here sometime, and you end up just becoming really good
right.
friends. And it's cool because some of the relationships that I've had the longest are from BMX. And I think it's just the way, like it's like you mentioned
Absolutely.
earlier, like this the way that we think, and it leads us down this path that's very unconventional. One would say it's not safe. It's not what society says you should do. And for me, I mean, I dropped out of high school. I ended
Right.
up finishing school later on, but I just was like so set on BMX. And I want to backtrack a little bit. What was like? Was there a moment that you went all in on BMX? Because you mentioned you didn't go to college, you didn't have like the typical career one would say, even though you paid your bills and you ate food because of what you did on your
Right.
bike. But what was there a moment where you had to make a decision between like I'm gonna go get a job, maybe I'm gonna go to college, or I'm gonna play a sport? Well, you mentioned you stopped playing sports at 13, but was there like a moment that
Yeah.
like led you down this path to BMX?
Yeah, I had a probably very similar experience with school as you did. Yeah, I went to high school and then I actually dropped out around 17. I like got my degree and everything, but I stopped going at that point, and that was the decision maker. My mom was like, you either need to finish high school or you need to get your degree and then go get a job if you don't want to go to college. And it was the point of like, all right, I don't want to go to college, so what am I going to do? And it was like BMX was the only answer. Like I thought about it a lot, and it always came up. That's all I wanted to do. There was nothing in college that I wanted to learn. There was no career I wanted to do, and I just couldn't stop thinking about BMX. So it was around 17 years old where I quit going to high school and just went full in on BMX. I started riding all during the day since I wasn't at school, and I was doing shows. There was a local guy in Colorado was still there, Yellow, Brian Gavigan, who still has Yellow Design stunt team. And he started his stunt team around that same time when I was 16. And that was like the perfect segue from high school into just doing shows full time. And he was just starting out. So it was a lot of like doing free shows, which at 16, I didn't care. Like I got to go ride in front of people and ride a box jump and like just got to ride. So that's all I cared about. Um, and it kind of like I'm sure you had similar things of like your parents don't necessarily understand it or agree. So while my mom and dad were trying to be supportive as possible, like, yeah, we want to support you in your dreams, but at the same time they were like, what are you doing? Like, this is dangerous. It's not a good career path. Like, and at that time too, like it was very difficult. There's probably like Dave Mira, Hoffman, a handful of guys in the world actually making money off of BMX. So like it didn't look too promising to my parents. They were kind of like, we'll support you, but we don't agree with this at all. But I was lucky that they supported me. So I was able to live at home still with my mom and just ride full time. And that kind of like took on to being able to travel and being able to live at home, having the support like that with my mom. I didn't have like rent or bills. I wasn't interested in moving out and settling down on that type of road. So I was able to just kind of travel and be home when I needed to be. But it was around 17 years old that I kind of like decided this is what I'm going to go all in on, and wherever it takes me, it takes me. And I'm no longer hesitating on what I want to do. But yeah, it seemed like kind of similar path as you, like kind of around 17, college, kind of make that decision on where you want to go with your life, what you want to do.
Yeah, for sure. And that's when I was 17 and a half, I want to say. Yeah, it was towards like the end of being 17, right before I turned 18. I accidentally moved to Greenville, and it worked out because of how cheap it was to live there. Like I was paying $200 a month for rent, and just a simple life, just pay
Right,
for
right.
food, pay for rent, and then I had some flow sponsors. For those listening that don't know what that means, it's just like when a brand gives you free product. So my bike was taken care of, so I was like, oh, free bike, free parts, $200 for rent. I started doing shows full time, and was also competing and making a little bit of money off that, basically just enough to pay for my travel to the next event until the next year. I got a sponsor that took care of travel, so that dynamics changed. I was like, I'm profiting 500 to $1,000 a month right now. Like, this is great. But it was
Right, right.
definitely an interesting dynamic between my parents and I, because my mom was super supportive. Like, she saw the work ethic in school, and then also working a job. I went to a technical high school, so like 2 weeks work, 2 weeks academics in high school, which is kind of what led me to wanting to not go to school anymore, because I was like 16, 17, making 20 to $40 an hour landscaping in Cape Cod. And I'm going to ride my bike and I'm making money off that. Like, let's do that. My dad always
Right,
told me though,
right.
like, this is great. Follow your dreams, follow your passion. We see the work ethic, we see the success. But, he told me for like 6, 7 years after I moved, like, always have a backup plan. Like, what's your backup plan? And it wasn't until I was like in my mid 20s when he was like, you seem like things always work out the way they're meant to. You got a good head on your shoulders. He stopped telling me to have a backup plan. But what's really interesting is when we're teenagers, we're expected to decide on something we're going to do for the rest of our lives, and we're going to go to college for. And for me, in that moment, I was like, it's BMX. It's BMX. I'm going to do this
Right.
forever.
Hands down.
And now, I was able to make a career out of it, and pay my bills with only, like, I think, 2 part-time jobs throughout the 12 years since I left home. Maybe 13 years now. But now I find myself 31 years old, and I've transitioned away from making a dollar from BMX and doing something completely different that I never fathomed doing. But BMX led me through this journey, which I uncovered these new passions. So, and I've seen some similar transitions with you in terms of perspective, and I know we have some things to talk about today. And I want to ask, like,
Yeah, man.
what's we have a lot of things I wanted to pick your brain about, but like, what's the number one thing that you think BMX has opened your mind to exploring? You talked about spirituality and just this new perspective, and that's what we connected on making this podcast happen, was a post you did about gratitude and perspective. But what's been a significant event that just opened your mind to this new realization that wouldn't have maybe happened? We can't say that for sure, but maybe wouldn't have happened if you hadn't taken the route with BMX.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if there was like a defining moment or anything, but it was definitely around that same time, around being 16, 17, where I started to veer away from high school and look at what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and um, and and that I wanted to follow BMX. And actually, that guy that I mentioned before, Brian Gavigan, Yellow, he was a huge influence at that time. I spent like every day with him building ramps, and he was a bit older than me. He was around 25 at the time, so he was an adult. He's living on his own, and he's taking a unique approach to life that I hadn't seen before that. So I grew up in kind of like a conventional, normal American suburb style. Like, we had our problems, but pretty normal. And then meeting this guy who was a artist and a bike rider, and he was actually making money as an artist doing murals and stuff like that, and was already doing an unorthodox lifestyle. And actually, it was around 16 years old I met him and became friends. And it was the first time that I heard the word organic food. Like, growing up eating McDonald's and random meat and stuff like that. Like it just wasn't a thing. Like it just started becoming popular having organic food. But it was this guy that introduced me to that. And that was kind of like just one thing, but it kind of like segued into just everything. Like, what else don't I know about? What else do I need to like educate myself on? And it was interesting because in all through school, I really struggled with reading. I couldn't read well. I had special classes for it, and I never liked reading. It was terrible. As soon as I finished high school, I started to just get curious about things and would just go to the library and just start reading and just find subjects that I was interested in, and basically just kind of went crazy on reading books all the time, hanging out with Brian, and kind of opened my mind towards everything in life. And that just kind of like made me more interested on finding kind of, I've read a lot of like philosophy books and autobiographies, and I wanted to like kind of get into the spiritual side of everything. So that was kind of the point. And then through BMX, I actually had a conversation with a buddy one time who was a lifelong BMXer, and we kind of went back and forth on like the chicken or the egg thing. Like, are we drawn to BMX because we are these type of humans that like unorthodox lifestyles and adventure, and we like this type of stuff? Or do we end up riding BMX and then that turns us into people that wanna follow these paths of unorthodox lifestyle? We're like, oh, it kind of opens us up. So I'm like, which one came first? Like, was I drawn to it? Or, but either way, it kind of is the same result of you end up riding all the time, and then you can only ride for like 2 or 3 hours, maybe a few hours more than that a day. So when you don't have a job and you don't have school and you just want to ride, you ride until you're tired or exhausted, and then you have the rest of the day to do whatever you want. And I would often be like 15 miles from home, downtown Denver, riding BMX, and then I'd get tired. So I'd go to a coffee shop and I'd sit and read, and ended up just writing about, kind of like journaling and writing down just whatever thoughts I had at the time. And that kind of segued into just going to coffee shops on purpose and just staying there for like hours and hours and reading and writing. And that kind of like flew into wanting to write my own book and stuff. I already had like journals of notes and books of years for all kinds of information on there. So kind of just sitting down and writing, and just kind of like whatever pops in my head, whatever problem I'm going through at the time, whatever life throws at me, I kind of either think about that or read something that kind of sparks something else. So like just sitting down writing has been a life-changing experience. It kind of like, and it kind of went hand in hand with BMX. It always worked out because when I was ever tired, I could just go to a coffee shop or wherever and write, and it kind of just flew and flowed together. So that's been a huge part of it. And kind of through like examining life, all those times sitting at coffee shops, figuring things out and working through internal problems, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I think whenever you can write or speak or get what's in your mind out and observe it, you learn a lot about yourself and you learn a lot about life and the things you thought you were passionate about or interested in, or things you never thought you would be. And it's funny you mentioned that, for both of us, it's so funny. And I want to touch upon like the chicken or the egg concept after, but you and I both left school maybe uninterested at the time in reading and writing and learning. We were so, singular minded on BMX, but then that led us into this interest of learning and educating, but in our own way. And that's like what I said earlier. It's so weird to me that we're forced. I mean, it makes sense. We can go into that rabbit hole later on if we want, but it makes sense. But why you're like at 16, I mean, even younger, like my girlfriend, she's an athletic trainer at a private high school here, Durham Academy in North Carolina. And they're super young, like super smart and talented, but there's so much stress on them to like, what college are you gonna go to as a freshman? Like, what are your grades at? Like, what are you taking for extra credit courses? And like,
It's insane.
it's like, someone made a joke earlier that I heard about like, yeah, like you gotta pick this career until you're in your 30s and you like no longer use that degree and you change direction. But I just find it super funny
Right.
that like you and I both become passionate about questioning things and learning about ourselves outside of school. And I see that just because like I've always been stubborn. I'm like, if I'm forced to do something, especially I don't want to do, I lose all interest in it. It becomes difficult to me. And then I'm like, no. But then after traveling, especially, you have this curiosity that builds. and you want to learn more. You
Right.
want to find answers to questions that you now have and you've gone through experiences. And back to the chicken and the egg thing with BMX, I think it's a combination, and it's something interesting because I never thought about it this way, but like I think there's a certain personality type that is like, oh, like, because we come from traditional sports. You were playing soccer, I was playing baseball and basketball. And there's something about BMX. When I first tried it, I was like, oh, I like this. This is fun. Like, it's on my own terms. I can be creative. I can be free. There's no right or wrong. Like, I didn't mess up
Right.
to like let down the team. And I learned from my mistakes. So they weren't really mistakes, they were learning lessons. But then that also brings out a part of you that maybe you didn't know. And that's the journey I've been on this last couple of years. It's like what I said earlier, like BMX isn't what I do. I am who I am that led me to BMX, and that's a form of expressing myself. And now I'm learning so much about myself mentally and emotionally because of BMX.
Right. It's kind of funny. It goes back and forth, and like, yeah, it's kind of connected like that. It's interesting.
So, like I said, that post we were connecting on about this podcast today, you were talking about gratitude, and for me, my takeaway was perspective, because I think that's where gratitude comes from. Is when we are maybe feeling lack or jealousy or whatever it is, it comes from a loss of perspective. But when we can widen or broaden our perspective to being grateful for even having technology like this, for all the people that are listening or watching, or the way we're communicating right now, like just simple things that we often look over in autopilot, I think that's what narrows our perspective, and then we start feeling ungrateful. And I mean that sounds negative, but like we start losing gratitude. So
Yeah, absolutely.
what moments have you gone through that's been like that's opened your mind to being like, oh shit, like I have so much to be grateful for. Like because I for me it's like I'm alive. We're human beings.
Right.
We could be a plant. We could not exist, but we're
For
here.
sure. That's like the first step is like, I'm here. I woke up today. So like right off the bat, that's, you should be grateful for that. And not everyone has that. So yeah, it's exactly what you just said, like perspective. And I can't remember what it was, but there was a book I read recently that brought it to my attention, was kind of saying gratitude. Basically wake up every morning, and the very first thing you do, don't look at your phone, don't think about anything else, and just have gratitude, and just be aware of the moment you wake up and say thanks that I'm alive, thank that I'm here, that I'm a person, that whatever it is, whatever, there's always something. Like, thanks I have a pair of pants to wear today. Like, thanks for something. And just being grateful and drawing attention to it and having that perspective. When you just go about your day and you're in it and you're in life, you kind of lose your perspective of what's really important, how you really feel about things, because there's so many things being thrown at us, so much information, that it can get skewed, and you kind of, your attention span can only pay attention to so many things. So if you just let it go crazy, everything will grab your attention. So having that moment right off the bat in the morning or anytime during your day to like focus your mentality and your attention on being grateful, it pushes everything else out, all your problems, everything else that you were thinking about that may or may not be important right now. It just draws that perception and that focus on being grateful. And then it'll snowball effect into the rest of your day or the rest of your activity or whatever you're doing, of a whole different mindset and appreciation for the moment that you're in right now. So like, I felt it personally. Like, I read that book and kind of had these ideas of having, of drawing attention to the gratefulness, and it's crazy how it just flows into everything else, and you end up having gratefulness for things you wouldn't necessarily have thought of before, and it kind of flows in the rest of your day, and you have a different perspective. I'd say a lot more positive, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's like opening up your awareness to these people because they're there. All possibilities
Right.
exist, but until we become aware of the possibilities and stop shutting our brains off from them, we're not going to see them. And so people talk about like law of attraction. Some people are all about it. It's a spectrum. Some people are all about it. Some people are like, no, it's fake. It doesn't matter. That's
Right.
bullshit. But I think the main idea of law of attraction is just awareness. The more you're aware of the opportunities and the things that you want, the more you see them in front of you, because they're always there. And they've done like social experiments with
Right.
like money on the ground, but like having these events happen on the sidewalk, and someone's, they're complaining they don't have money, and then all of a sudden the money's right there, but because they're stressed on something that's happening, they're not able to see it because their focus is so narrowed. And
Yeah.
that's,
If they're sorry, go on.
go ahead.
I was saying, yeah, if you're focused on not having any money, then there can be money right in front of you and you won't even see it because your mentality is, I don't have any money, I need some money, like, and you're just focused on the negative. And that's another thing is that like there's everything coming at you all day, negative and positive at all moments. So it's just what you pay attention to. What do you want to pay attention to? And that's what your life is. That's like the moment of life, like what you're paying attention to. And you're in control of that. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't fully understand, of how much you're in control of what you're paying attention to.
Yeah, I think that's what I've been, I'd say, studying and learning and experiencing the last, I'd say, 3 to 4 years now on a very deep level. But like learning about our state of being and our personality, and our personality is made of the way we think, the way we feel, or our emotions, and the way we behave. And something that comes to mind is a concept that was shared with me. It's the TEAR concept. So it's an acronym: thoughts, drive emotions, drive actions, give you results, or create your reality. And I wanted to ask, on that note, do you have a practice of meditation?
Um, I do. I do. I would say more or less I'm kind of all over the place. I kind of just will do whatever meditation I feel I need at that moment. So sometimes it's sitting still, cross-legged, and fully like going inward and trying to clear everything out. And then a lot of times I'll do like walking meditations, and I really like those, like just going for a walk. And um, it's I like those the most because you're kind of like, when you're walking, you're distracted by everything going on, but at the same time, you're fully inward thinking about whatever you're focused on, and you can kind of again have a different perspective on it. So yeah, I kind of switch back and forth between some type of meditation pretty much all the time. And I mean, personally for me, like, that was a big thing that drew me to BMX in the first place, is that it was almost like a form of meditation. When you're focused on a trick, like a lot of times it'd be focused on something so much that you block out who you're riding with, you block out all your problems, you block out everything, and you're so focused on what you want to do that it's definitely a whole different mindset, and it's a whole different way of thinking. And that kind of like, I think, drew me towards meditation. Was like, I'm already doing it half the time riding anyway. Like, you would I would ride for like hours and then come back to like reality and back to normal life and be like, oh yeah, this is what's going on. And that kind of like, if through injuries probably, it kind of like time not riding or whatever, you kind of end up still following the meditation, is basically what I would do, is still find a way to meditate even though I couldn't ride. So it kind of flew back into that. But yeah, do you meditate at all?
Yeah, I've been on and off with consistency for years with meditating and thinking like, oh, riding is my meditation, or I don't need to meditate, or I meditated for some time and I reached what I was. And then just the last, I'd say, year, I've committed to, and not every day. There's days that I don't, but I'd say the last 30 days, I made a commitment using Sam Harris's Waking Up app. He's got like a 28 day meditation like challenge, if you will, but it's just teaching different practices and techniques of meditation. And it's become a really big part of my life because, and I actually just started like 2 3 months ago now doing float tanks and utilizing
Okay.
that just to like cut off every bit of sensory input besides my mind and my consciousness. And
For
the reason I
sure.
asked is because just being able to, for me, I haven't experimented with the walking meditations, but I've been learning a little bit about them and hearing other people talk about them. And the way you explained it, I can see how that'd be vastly different but beneficial in its own way. But for me, what helps is blocking out, I wear these earbuds and I have either a guided meditation or just some meditation music, close my eyes or have like a eye mask on. And I just sit there, maybe in this chair, maybe we have like a little porch that overlooks the sidewalk. I'll sit out there and just really focus on just nothing, like just focus on my breath, but being aware, like not making it right or wrong, not having an intention to create something out of this, not trying to be perfect, not trying to cut out thoughts, but just blocking out any visual or audio, any noise, things like that, but just to become familiar with myself. And through that and journaling, I've learned so much about the way I thought and the way I felt and the way I think and I feel today. And it's really interesting because in those moments when you can recognize, when something good happens in your life, you felt gratitude or you felt excited, you felt whatever you want to label it as good because nothing else other than yourself. New information came in and you unconsciously used your brain and all the different systems we have to create that feeling. And
Right.
contrast that to negative. Someone said something about you. They didn't make you feel bad. You unconsciously made yourself feel bad through these different mechanisms and chemicals that are released based off past experiences. But one of my
Absolutely.
favorite things is just having conversations like this or meditating or journaling or just thinking about what you're thinking about is becoming aware, becoming conscious of who you are. Because the more you can learn how you think, how you feel, how you behave, the more you can audit the life you live and if you like it or not, and the different aspects if you like them or not, and then change them.
Absolutely. I think yeah, that's a huge part of it is I think the meditation, like bringing awareness towards what your thoughts are, and then once you kind of like break it down like you're doing or journaling through that, like you again have a different perception of it. So you're breaking down your thoughts and you actually can see where those thoughts came from or those emotions came from. And you oftentimes will find out like, hey, someone said that and I felt bad about it, but that's not that person. And actually I feel bad because of these past experiences that aren't really how I feel at all. Like how we feel isn't necessarily driven from ourselves. Like someone made me feel a certain way a long time ago and now I bring that with me, and now every time I hear that same thing I feel that same way because I have these past experiences, if that makes sense. So
No, for sure.
so yeah, so a lot of the times a lot of the thoughts that we have or the feelings and emotions that we're feeling are not our own. And when you have the time to sit down and think about them, like, hey, I actually don't feel that way at all about this. Like i I was had stuff in my subconscious. Basically, your subconscious is collecting data 24/7 your whole entire life. So a lot of your feelings are not necessarily yours. Your a lot of your thoughts, they might have been in your brain extracted from years ago of a TV program you watched or something ridiculous. Like I actually don't feel that way. It's your mind plays tricks on you. So kind of like breaking it down to figure out how you feel about things and how you actually emotionally feel about things is like it's a long process for sure, but it's
Oh yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it's fun. And two things that come to mind is learning about the concepts of emotional baggage and how we develop our personalities at a young age. We don't have a logical thinking brain that's fully formed until you're 25, 26, but especially when we're 0 to 12, we're basically modeling or we're observing and we're feeling and we're not having rational thought about something. So we could get yelled at for doing something we thought was right, but because the authority figure was stressed out or we were late or whatever, we didn't make that connection logically or mentally. We just felt,
Absolutely.
oh, like not keeping up is bad and get yelled at, or it makes you, feel stressed, or you don't even know how to rationalize those emotions. But then later on in life you find yourself as like a type A, like always got to be going, and then if everything's calm you're like freaking out because your body's so addicted to stress now. And until you become aware,
Sure.
you're like, oh shit, like okay. But also the second part of why I want to bring that up was right now, I think it was mid-January was the last time I rode ramps or anything like that. I've been on my bike around the neighborhood a couple times since, but the more I've been peeling back the layers of myself and looking in, I was finding that BMX was an escape for me for so long, and like an emotional crutch. Like anytime I felt bad, I'd go ride. But it also gave me a voice. It gave me attention that maybe I was seeking when I was younger. And there was a lot of these insecurities I was uncovering that were secured because of riding and how
Interesting.
people saw
Yeah.
me and how I related myself to the world. And now I'm like, all right, well, let's take some time. And there's a lot of resistance there, but let's take some time away from it. It's not going to go anywhere. And let's just see
Right,
what I
right,
can
right.
change about myself. And then that way, when I do get back on my bike in that capacity, I'll have a better appreciation, but I'll know more about myself and what's going on and where I want to go.
Yeah, I think you'll have a lot better like pure intentions when you're actually riding, and it's not going to be masked with all the things that it's hiding. I definitely like 100% can relate to that situation. I definitely kind of still working through it, I'd say at this point, because I'm still riding. So, but I definitely had a lot of time, like years of identifying myself as a BMX rider, and because of like the confidence that you build through riding or anything that you do where you are getting better at it and it's an art form and you're expressing yourself, anything that you're building a talent for, you build confidence for, and that confidence just transfers over to your everyday life, and then it just starts mixing together to where your confidence and your BMX, and it's all one thing. So you identify with your BMX as your confidence source. So if you take that BMX away, then your confidence as a human being or who you are as a person is completely different. And that's kind of what you're finding out. And I've definitely been still diving into of like, who am I without the BMX? I'm not just a BMX rider. So if you take that away, what do you have left? And then that's kind of when you go inward of like, all right, you kind of have to dissect everything of like, what is me? What isn't me? What do I like? And really get down to what's going on. But I've definitely like had BMX be that mask of hiding from whatever insecurities or problems I had and kind of using it as an escape. And it worked so great for so long. And you can definitely ride that for a while, but eventually it's going to catch up with you, and you do have to figure out what you are without that BMX, or without that thing that's holding your confidence up as a person. And
Yeah.
I think like a lot of people do that with whatever. It's such an attractive thing to do, to build confidence. So whatever your art is, whatever your activity is that makes you feel good about yourself, it's very addicting. So people usually, it's very easy to just dive right in.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you do something for so long, like we have, it becomes an unconscious piece of your identity, like you said. Like, yeah, like who are you, Nick? Like, you're like, oh, I'm a BMX athlete, and this, and like I did that for so long, and like, yeah, you're right, you build confidence, and that was something until recently I wasn't aware of, but I realized this new path I'm on, a little over 2 years now, speaking, like public speaking, and running my own business and things like that. It's like anytime I felt stressed, overwhelmed, I go back to riding, and that's my place of comfort. That was my place of mastery. 10,000 hours, or more, like that was that. And I started noticing every time I did that, I would feel worse in the sense of feeling like incompetent or insecure or afraid of this new path I'm on and what people will think of me, or am I good enough, like imposter syndrome, like all these things. And that's when I came to this realization. I was like, I noticed this connection that's happening. Let's take this input out and see, or this, yeah, let's take this input out and see if I get a new output from doing so. And it's been maybe 7 months now, 8 months. Yeah, we're almost mid September. So I've just been learning so much. And I posted a video clip on Instagram last night saying I'd be lying if I didn't miss this feeling, but I'd also be lying if I said that that feeling was worth more than what I'm experiencing now in personal growth and development. And I'm so excited for when I do feel the time is right to get back on my bike to the capacity I know I can ride my bike at, because I'm gonna have a deeper appreciation, but I'm gonna know who I am, and I'm not gonna get lost in the ego of being fulfilled with BMX, and that, who I was, and people are looking at me, people find me interesting because I ride BMX, and like all these things. This is just an
Absolutely.
expression of who I am, and I love this, and I also love this life, and this life wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for this life. And that's kind of like what my back tattoo kind of tells the story of, like leaving home and BMX bringing me to the life I have today and saving my life, which has a lot of emotional shit built up in there from, the brain tumor diagnosis and, all that stuff that came from BMX. But
Right, right.
yeah, it's very interesting when you, like you said, you dive in, what you find. And because when you pull the curtain back or you open your eyes, you can't unsee things that you now see or saw. And then it's just a decision moving forward. Like, what do you want to do about it?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a lot of like fear base in that too, of like leaving BMX, and it's like, well, what if I fail? Like, because we've built up these confidences of succeeding, of learning things and doing good. So like that fear of like, what if the next thing I do, or if I leave BMX, what if that doesn't work out as well as BMX did? You know, like there's that embedded fear of what if I lose that confidence, whatever it is. And kind of like any problem, the only way to really fix it is to hit it head on. And so to push that fear aside and just dive right in is literally the only way to come out the other side.
Yeah, we learned that vividly in BMX. If you're afraid of a new trick and you do something out of fear, to maybe like a backflip's a great example. You see this in the foam pit all the time. People start going straight and then last minute they turn over their shoulder. And if you were to do that on a real ramp, you probably don't know how to flare and you probably wouldn't be prepared to do that. And
Right.
I think flares are another great example. I always see that people get scared of committing to the flip, and so they turn and then they slide out or they don't come around. And but yeah, I mean
Absolutely.
that's something. I was at this back in end of February, right before COVID, in the stay-at-home orders. I went to like this business meets UFC event that my friend put on, and he combined the two worlds. And the idea was them expressing, you know, how these athletes are their own business, like how they walk out is their branding, how they, you know, they train, how they compete, like all these things. And one of the lessons that the fighter, because we us non-fighters were there experiencing it for the 2 3 days, so they were bringing us through their trainings and like they geared us all up and had us walk out and like they just did like a little mock, you know, match with us, and
Nice.
they went probably like 20% on us, but they let us go because they had the pads on, all that.
Oh, for
But they
sure.
were explaining with different holds and different like arm bars or different setups like that. When you feel like you're getting into one of those, you're gonna be afraid. You're gonna want to pull away, but that gives the opponent the leverage. So what they were talking
Mm,
about was like you have to roll into fear. You have to like push into fear. And we see that
right.
so much in life that people are afraid of something and they end up doing something else. And you and I have
That's a
learned
good
that
point.
very vividly in BMX. You know, like 'cause if you don't commit, you hit the ground and it hurts.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good way of thinking of it. Like a lot of times your natural instincts will kind of go against what's actually you should be doing. So like the flare or the armbar situation, like your natural instinct is to roll in the opposite position or whatever because your internal's freaking out. But if you push through it, then that's the only way to pull the trick or get out of the armbar. Is like you got to go towards the fear and not do what your body naturally wants to do and run away. It's definitely a mind game, and I think that that's like a huge thing of it. It's all mental, and figuring out where those weaknesses are, where those hidden things are, to try to push past them. Like, and that's another thing with like BMX is like if you're doing a flare, like it's all mental, like figuring out how it works in your head first, and then kind of making it a reality, and just working through that in your head first, and that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, visualization is a huge aspect of being a human being, but we see that a lot in sports, or we hear it more commonly in sports. You know, visualize what you're going to do on the court, or what you're going to do on your bike, or in the ring. You know, whatever it is. But if what I'm learning is you can apply that same mentality to your life, and something I love is, you know, this notion of being defined by your future rather than your past. Because if you're defined by your past, you're basically living your past in the present, which is predicting what your tomorrow is going to look like or your future is going to look like. But if you create this
Absolutely.
new model for yourself in your mind that you're working towards in terms of creating a new personality, creating a new reality, then you're going to be triggered in different ways emotionally and behaviorally, if that's even a word. I think it's a word. Maybe not. I feel like I make up words all the time. But you're going to
Bye.
end up, yeah, you're going to end up, you know, creating a new reality because in turn you're doing something different, and you can't help but get a new outcome if you do something different. And on that note, I'm curious as to, you know, because you put in the I always have in the podcast form for guests to put in like a bio or talking points, and you wrote BMX/artist of life, and I want to dive into that and get your perspective on what that means to you, and let's see where that goes.
For sure. So when I first started reading books around 16, one of the first books I picked up was actually Bruce Lee's book, and it was I think an autobiography called The Artist of Life, and it's basically him writing, and it has like poetry in there, and it has him being a philosopher, and has him talking about martial arts, and through the whole book, he kind of expresses himself, um, that martial arts for him and for anyone, it's like it's an expression of himself. It's an expression of him as a human being to fully express yourself through martial arts, and that he wasn't a martial artist by like that's not who he identified with. He was a person and he was an artist of life, and that was he did poetry, he did philosophy, he did all kinds of different stuff, and he was basically everything that he did was an expression of who he was as a person, and how he showed that was his art, was everything that he did was his martial arts. And that's kind of like what I identify with BMX and with everything that I do, is that we're basically artists, and so everything you create is an expression of yourself. So like having that mentality and using that as a backbone to kind of drive through life like that. So it's kind of definitely been more recently that I've kind of put that into mode, put that into my head when I'm actually writing or doing anything now. Like if I'm writing or writing a book or anything that I'm doing, I take that into consideration and take that into thought, that we are artists and that everything is an self-expression. And that's kind of the idea behind it.
I love that. I actually just wrote that down, that book. So my girlfriend, I don't know if you know, she's a former Taekwondo athlete. She competed for
Did not know that.
14, 15 years, Team USA athlete, like all that stuff. And then that led her to
Nice.
athletic training. She made a decision between going down this path and, seeing where that could go, or she became really passionate about athletic training. So she had to pick between college and all that. And I think she
Oh,
fought
okay.
through college for some time, but then went all in. And
Okay.
I think she may have read that book, or she'd be interested in reading it. So I wrote that down because that sounds interesting to me. But also, artist of life. So my NLP coach, or neuro linguistic programming, like business life coach, like spiritual, whatever you want to consider her. She says people consider her all different types of things, but really it's just it's someone that's been trained in the art of listening to words and understanding the meaning behind words and helping people get, her thing is creating momentum in their life and getting unstuck, if you will. So we met in January. We both gave a talk at a similar event we were invited to, and we hit it off right away. And was it like end of April? I hired her on as my coach. So about 5 months now, 6 months or so. But she gave a talk in February at an event that we were at together, that UFC business event. And I believe it was called, it was something, it was like artist of your life, maybe or it was like you are the artist of your life, something like that, because she's also an actor. And she
Okay.
was taking a interesting spin on her talk, but it was getting at that, and it was getting at the fact that um, our external world is a reflection of our internal world. So we all have different realities, and that's what they say. Have you heard the quote, or like the saying, like there's one earth but a billion worlds?
I have not, but that makes total sense.
So, because we all have our unique lens that we see our lives through and we see the world through. And it was just interesting the way
Absolutely.
you were just describing that book, and how Bruce Lee was talking about him being an artist and how we're all artists of our lives. And that notion of your internal world reflects in your external world. And that's something that I've been really connecting the dots on. And it's easy to see in like a monetary example with, if you believe that, wealth is only for lucky people or evil people or whatever your belief is, and then you find yourself always in lack or always in struggle for financials. That's an example of that. And I saw a lot of like my emotional baggage and stress and all this shit around money when I was growing up, and then what I saw in BMX, and then how I found myself participating in BMX. And then now that I've been changing that, and I've been, what I say is, off self on purpose in my life, I've been seeing that dynamic change in my external world. And I always have that in my mind when there's something externally happening, whether it's a conversation, it's an event, it's a material or money, and it's not going my way. I'm thinking, I'm like, what about me is creating this? There's some limiting
Right.
belief or negative emotion that I'm attached to right now that's creating this. And so that all just went through my mind when you were describing that book, Artist of Your Life, or Artist of Life, because it just resonates so much with me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another thing too that I'm also learning and trying to focus on, is that like again, like you create your own reality. So what you're focusing on is 100% vital to what you want the outcome to be. So if you have financial problems and you're focusing on the fact that you have financial problems, then that's going to continue. You know, it's not until you change your mind on how you focus on these things and how you think about them, and then what you're looking for. But I actually used to ride with a buddy of mine that we would sit on the deck, and anytime we would just go back and forth on learning tricks, and we would just say visualize and attack. And basically it's just drawing attention to yourself to focus on that one thing. And you would literally just sit in your mind and visualize it, and visualize yourself pulling the trick and focusing on it going well. And then you would go and attack and go do it, make it a reality. And it was like, and it was such an instant surge of like instant gratification, because you would, a lot of times it would work out. Obviously not every time, you'd fall sometimes, but a lot of time you picture in your head and just fully see yourself visualizing it and fully pulling the trick. And then you would, 9 times out of 10, you pull it or get close to it. And that instant gratification, that instant confidence, like it was so gratifying. And I think that's probably a problem with, like, it makes it a little harder in normal life, because it's not the instant gratification of what you focus on, what you're actually making a reality. Usually like financial would take a little bit more time than just instant. So I think it's a little harder to draw that connection of what you're focusing on is actually 100% vital on what your outcome is going to be.
Yeah, on that note, there's this concept of delayed gratification that I've become aware of. Like a couple months ago, I had first heard someone explain that for the first time, and I was like, oh shit, that makes a lot of sense. Society today, especially the younger generation, it's everything whenever you want. It's immediate gratification,
Absolutely.
immediate reward, or immediate information. But with BMX, there's a time before you get to a point of mastery and you can do all your tricks dialed and first try. There's a time where delayed gratification is a huge aspect of it. But I found that the vision that we've held in our mind to get to that point outweighed the loss, if you will, of immediate satisfaction, because we were so defined by what we wanted to do that was in our mind, that it led us to doing it. And like
Sure.
you said, the more you can see it in your mind, the more you can visualize it, and you can feel what it'd feel like to land that trick, the more you're going to be apt to focus entirely on it and do it the way you know. Not every time it's going to work out. I've taken years to learn one trick. I'm sure you've been in that route too. But having that visualization piece, but understanding things take time, the more you lose control of the outcome, the quicker it happens, which is a weird paradox to find yourself
Hmm.
in. But that's
Sure.
something I've seen play out in non BMX life for me, is just understanding the more I focus on what I want rather than what I don't want. So getting rid of perceived fear, and then do the work and let go of controlling the outcome, the quicker things happen. But also, the more things I could have never imagined happening in that way occur. And I'm just like, oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's another thing too, is that when you're going through something like that and something will occur that you weren't anticipating and weren't expecting, and I think that plays mind tricks on us. At least for me personally, like this conversation, a perfect example. Like we can talk about something that I couldn't possibly have visualized an hour ago or yesterday, and how we react to it personally, like me and you, like how we handle this conversation is completely different than how we would have thought we do it. And we might come across something that we would never could have imagined, because we're not in that situation yet. So like just being in new situations can open your eyes up to how a new perspective on things, a new perspective on yourself, and how you might act towards something.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples of that is the phrase "I can't," and how I explain that shuts your brain off. You say you can't do something, whether you can't afford it, you can't do that, you can't have that, you can't go, like whatever it is, it shuts your brain down. But when you ask yourself, how can I? It opens the gateway to possibilities. You start creating all these mental pictures of like ways you could possibly have, do, or create whatever it is you want. And then you emotionally feel different. Because when you say you can't do something, I guarantee no one feels good about that. Like,
Yeah.
you
You
know, I,
feel that when you say that in your head. Like you feel that energy of like, I can't. That feeling sucks.
yeah. And that goes back to that terror analogy, because the thoughts you have trigger the emotions that you feel. And that influences the way you behave or the choices you make in action. And that gives you the result of the reality you live in. And so that's why I think journaling and meditation has been so huge for me. The more I've accepted, so the more I've accepted the resistance to things in my life are the things I need to do, the more I've been able to break through and then have these realizations, have these experiences, have these conversations. And the more all that happens, the more I'm living in the way I want. Like I'm living the life I want at my core. Because we say, people say, oh, like I just wish I had $1 million. Okay, why? And you keep playing the why game, and it goes back to this insecurity of not having enough, not having security, not, whatever. It's like a fear-based thing. And then once you think about, well, what would it be like to live without fear, to live complete, to live whole, then you're like, oh, you see life differently. And for me, that's been a huge freedom aspect of my being.
That's really cool. Like, yeah, just like switching the narrative in your head and just asking a different question to the same problem instead of I can't. It's, well, how can we? And like I think you'll even get like crazy ideas that maybe won't even work, like in your head, like how can I? And then something that won't even work come into your head, but at least it's an idea. At least it's better than I can't. I can't yields no results. So like just changing the narrative, you'll come to a whole different reality. And at least this one you can create yourself. And that's definitely way better than someone creating your own reality for you. And
That's huge, because if you're not conscious about the way you're living your life, you're not conscious about creating your ideal life, you're living in other people's worlds. You're living in other people's creations. They're not always going to be positive. So that's like people are like, "Oh,
right.
well, I didn't ask for that car accident." Well, did you ask for a safe drive? Were you conscious of creating an intention to have a safe drive? Or are you living at the effect of other people in their own world? Oh,
Absolutely.
okay. Like
It's a
just
whole
thinking of it
different
like that.
perception.
I think that's
Yeah.
I think that's everything is intention.
Hmm. Absolutely. I wanted to make a comment too on the you were saying that your girlfriend Jackie works with those kids that are like 16-year-old and they're very like stressed out and confused. I think that's like a huge part of it. Like they're feeding off other people's energy and then they don't even know who their selves are at this point. Their brain hasn't fully developed, and the stress that people are putting on them, like of course they're gonna have problems with that. They don't know really fully how to think yet, and then other people are putting these pressures on them, so
There's a lot of
it's
projection too.
inevitably.
I've noticed there's a lot of projection with the
Absolutely.
generation, before us, like the younger generation from people. Thankfully, it sounds like you and I didn't have parents that were projecting their own fears on us. And I see two things happening commonly. I see parents projecting their own regrets and forcing their children down a path that they maybe don't like or maybe aren't good at. And they're stressed out because they're trying to learn something that they're not good at. They're uninterested in, so they think they're lazy. But then also see fear projections. And I had this experience with Jackie recently. She reached out to an athlete's of hers mother who's in a similar field, and she was asking for advice. And the woman projected so much fear and doubt onto her that was not
For
asked for.
sure.
And it was like, wow, like people, it's crazy because I, if there was one thing I wish middle school and high school kids could learn, and this is part of why I share, it's just that tear analogy. Just understanding the way you think creates the way you feel, creates or influences your behavior, which creates your state of being, creates your reality. Other people's influences are just influence. They're not, whatever they say about you isn't who you are. What you think about yourself isn't
Right.
even who you are. It's what you believe about yourself and how you feel. But you can change all that. And especially when the younger generation still, their prefrontal cortex is still developing, their unconscious mind is operating more and more than us right now. I think that could be a
Right.
huge game changer for society at large.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's definitely a huge problem is that I don't think they're hearing anybody. Like most people are not talking to them as we're talking right now and giving this information, because I think like Unfortunately, I think a lot of adults are in the same situation. They don't even know they're projecting any of their own emotional stuff, their emotional baggage onto these kids. And so it's just a snowball effect of uncontrolled emotions. And it's just a recipe for disaster. I think most adults that I know are not even consciously aware of all the decisions that they're making through the day. Um, and it's a hard thing to do, to draw your attention to all the things that need your attention. Life's ongoing, so it's 24/7. So, and your body and mind and your spirit's ongoing. So it's a lot to handle everything. But I think they're it's all getting misconstrued.
Yeah, it's about 30, when we're about 35, 95% of how we operate is unconscious. It's all a program that's been developed and conditioned from our past experiences. And it's like 60 to 80,000 thoughts are like the common amount of thoughts, or the amount of thoughts the average person has on any given day. But 90% of them are the same as the day before, and 50% of what we think isn't real. It's just a perception based thought from our past and the experiences we've had. And that's why
How
you can
crazy is
ask,
that?
yeah, it's mind boggling. But that makes sense why you can ask two people that were at the same event a year ago have completely different stories and meanings from it because they were operating with different programs. And until you're aware of that, you don't know why you respond the way you do. You don't know why you act the way you do, why you say you want to do this, and then you find yourself self-sabotaging yourself, and then you're upset. And it's, yeah, it's mind-boggling. But that's like my favorite place of learning right now, because it teaches you so much about who you are and how you interact with other people. And something that someone said recently blew my mind, and it makes so much sense, but how you show up could be the difference of how that person's future is shaped. Because if you showed up as an asshole one day because you had something that happened in your life, and then that person felt it, and then I got them to think a different way, that by nature creates a whole cascade of events that creates a different future for them. Rather than if you showed up, you're like,
Absolutely.
"Hey, what's up, Nick? How's it going? You know, you got
Completely
anything that I
different.
could help out with today?" Like you would have a whole different perception of life, and you would act differently. And it's just crazy because of the quantum physics talk with all these multiple possibilities always occurring. And it's like when you think of it like that, you're like, oh wow, like makes me want to be more conscious of how I show up in life.
Absolutely. I think another part of that too is the huge part is that people think that if you don't remember it or you weren't paying attention, that it's not going to have as big of effect on you. So like how you show up, if your subconscious is remembering that guy being a dick when he showed up that day, but you don't remember, but like your subconscious does, like in 5 years you'll be like, for some reason I feel like he could be a dick one day, because your subconscious remembers that one day. And your subconscious remembers everything. So when you're not showing up, even if you're not paying attention and you don't think this person has an effect on you, or their energy or their mood has an effect on you, it does. And so you remember that eventually, and you feel it, and your body feels it. So when you're around that person, you remember all the ways that they've acted in the past, and you will associate how you view them based off of those and off of your own experiences. So like again, it's a snowball effect, and your subconscious is always working. So um, it's a complicated thing, but it's definitely like it's vital to show up every day in that situation like that.
Yeah, it's crazy because we don't operate based on thought. We operate based on emotional chemicals that trigger
Right.
thoughts. And it's very fascinating because like you said, someone could show up, it could piss you off because it triggered a thought that crossed a boundary with your values or your beliefs on how one should act. And then that chemical created an emotion, and that emotion was so strong that day that your brain took a snapshot that we call memory. And then now every time you see that image, because the logical brain thinks in images, you create this emotion that creates this thought of like, that guy's a dick. I don't remember why, but like, that guy's a dick.
I
And
just know.
it's insane. Yeah.
Yeah. How many times have you heard someone say like, "Oh, that person reminds me of this person, so I don't like him."
Yeah,
You're
I never
like,
thought of
you're
that.
not
Yeah,
even the same
that's good.
person. They're like, I just look like that other person, and now I remind you of that person. Like you have negative feelings about that person, but it has nothing to do with me or anything, and they still follow along with that feeling.
Do you have any experience with Because I find the way you and I are talking right now is vastly different than when I was 17. I don't remember how old you were because I actually don't know how old you are. You can share if you want. But I was
There's no way to
17.
tell.
I was 17 when we first rode together, and then I was maybe 18, 19 when we went on that trip. Well, actually, I think I was still 17. It might have been the same year because it was with
It was pretty soon
maximum
after that.
velocity, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it had to have been that same year because the following year is when I moved to North Carolina. But the way we're talking now is vastly different. Who I am today is such an evolved version of who I was before, and it makes me sad when I see videos of myself, especially speaking and like writing videos, because I can see the pain and the insecurity I was living with, and how I am today is just so different. But where I want to go with that was the way I show up in life today, because I take 100% accountability for my reality. And the way I speak is profoundly different than even 3, 4 years ago. And when I come across people, especially in BMX, that haven't spoken to me in a while, or, I've just disconnected from them consciously for a very deep purpose. And then, I hear through the grapevine, or we come in whatever it is, but it's like, oh, you've changed, or it's like this, not shit talking, but like this negative like vibe about, or like write off of like who you are, because you're different than the version they hold in their mind about you. So
Right.
you experience that, and then where I want to go with that is, how does accountability play a role in your life, and like what is your perspective on holding yourself accountable for who you are?
Um, I think I've probably felt a lot of the same similar feelings towards people. Like I'm trying to think of the people, like I think all the BMX friends that I've kept over the years, I've been like, at this point, they're kind of like family and just kind of
Mm.
carried them along. Whereas there's definitely been a lot of people that have dropped off and I don't talk to for a lot of reasons. And I probably have changed a lot. And that's kind of like part of it. I think a lot of people grow up to be adults and then they think life just stops, that they stop growing, they stop learning. Like they just get to a point where they think you're growing up, and then when you get to be adult, you're just done. You're just living, and no one's like, they're not putting in time to grow and still evolve and still change. And I think that's what me and you were doing. Like you're supposed to change. You're supposed to get better. Today's supposed to be better than yesterday, and tomorrow's supposed to be better than today. Like you're supposed to be a more evolved person tomorrow. And the people that aren't doing that are going to drop off, and you kind of can't bring them with you when you're evolving and changing for the better. And these people are still, like you said, not necessarily talking negative, but just a whole different mindset towards life. And so you kind of end up, I've definitely like left a lot of people back that aren't parallel to the path that I'm on. Yeah. And then what was the other question?
Just curious about accountability and how that shows up in your life, because I found the more I took accountability for my life and made these changes that you just referenced, and just internally and externally, the more I hear the resistance, I would say that's a good word, from other people. And so I was just curious of how like you approach
For sure.
holding yourself accountable for your life, and how that may have influenced how other people react to you, that you haven't maybe spoken to in a while, or that you do on a regular basis, and then all of a sudden you're this new person, or you're talking differently, or you're doing things differently, or you're not doing things you were once doing.
Right. Um, I consciously, personally, I consciously like remind myself. I have like an inner voice that I tell myself that the path that I'm on and who I am as a person and where I'm going is for me and for me to understand. And I have to remind myself that a lot of people, parents and family included, that won't necessarily understand. And that's okay. That they don't have to understand. And the important thing is that I understand what I'm doing and hold myself accountable for myself at the end of the day, because a lot of people won't understand, and like not to carry that through and feel like I have to prove anything to them or feel like I have to change their minds and explain myself of who I am and like what I'm going through. Like I just uh, basically, if someone wants to understand, you can explain things to them, but at the same time, I just kind of go inwardly and deal with that myself, I guess.
No, I love that. And I wanted to say also, the more I've been open about not riding, or even when I was like slowly like moving away from like that lifestyle of like competing in shows and just doing other things and hanging out with other people, I started to embrace when I get negativity in terms of feedback. And the reason is because every time I would emotionally react, and then I'd be like, oh, why? Why am I doing this? And then it would lead me
Sure.
to learning more bits about myself. And then to now, I just like, I welcome it because I still find myself, will stop, but like emotionally reacting to things. And it always challenges me to like, what about myself? Do I need to learn right now? What about myself? Do I need to work on right now to where this isn't going to bother me? Because does this person or does this thing they're saying have any validity to myself and my life? Or am I making it about me? Am I making their shit about me? So it's just been a fun journey with
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like having negative feedback like that and how you deal with it, and not to identify with other people's ideas or perceptions of you. And then kind of like just thinking about them from a like um, I guess almost like a third party. Like, why does that person make me feel like this? And kind of taking a step back and looking at it, like, why do I feel like that? Is that me that feels like that, or is that him projecting onto me? And like, you definitely see what's going on through the core of things instead of how you just react or feel.
Yeah. You ever look into the shadow much? Like we have our ego, but then we also have our shadow.
Um, I'm aware of it,
I just
but
started diving into it. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. But from my
right.
understanding, it's like everything that you think you're not, the shadow is that. So when you're, let's say, showing up today and you're like, I'm going to be as positive I can, your unconscious mind is going to lead you to a conversation with someone that's a dickhead. And the shadow is going to come out because they're acting how you're trying not to, and you're telling yourself you're not this way. And so, from my understanding, the shadow is everything that you believe you're not. And it's there to give this contrast so that way you can be conscious of your ego and how you're living. And that's, I don't even know if that's correct, but
Interesting.
that's just kind of what I understand so far. It's been like a week. I've been like really diving into like understanding this and, and really
Yeah,
heard of
that's
it.
kind of how I understand it as well. And yeah, it's kind of a thing that's like always there. And I think being consciously aware of it and how to like working on maneuvering around it and is like the first step. Because when you're unconsciously aware that it even exists, then it's gonna just wreak havoc whenever it wants to. So
Yeah, the book I'm reading right now, I'm like 2 or 3 chapters. I just started it last week. It's called How to Integrate Your Shadow: The Path to Mastery, or something like that, by Dr. Matt James. He's an NLP master practitioner. His father is who, I guess, invented timeline therapy and mental and emotional release and all these NLP techniques. And he mentions in the book like an event he was at, his father was teaching, like he was teaching this seminar, and they were talking about something, and like this scene of there was this, I think a woman was sharing her story that she was, abused sexually, raped and things like that in her earlier years, and was working through it, and he could feel himself just boiling, just like getting super angry and like uncomfortable. And he talked to his dad about it, and the long story short of it comes is because he felt like that was something like he would never do, he would never be in all this stuff. And he was saying was that was the shadow at work, because the relationship he was in then, he felt like he couldn't express himself sexually, he couldn't talk to his partner about the things he enjoyed, the things he didn't enjoy, and he felt like this containment around his being. And so when people would talk about sexual abuse, he had this radical negative emotion occurring inside of him as the shadow. And it showed him that he needed to work on this. And then ironically, after they broke up, they talked about it, and they both felt that way. And then he could resolve that emotional trigger he had to where the similar situation or a movie scene, something like that, wouldn't trigger him the same way. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'm starting to grasp this idea of the shadow, and I can see how it plays out in my life on a daily basis.
interesting. That's fascinating. Um, yeah, I think I think that's another thing too, is that the mind is so tricky in how it actually works, and digging to the bottom of things and figuring out where the source is of these problems is it's fascinating, because it's not what you think it is going to be. It's usually a lot more complex and in depth of what's going on.
Dreams are really interesting too. Like diving deep into dreams, because that's your unconscious mind trying to send you like picture messages.
Right. Yeah, those are crazy. They get wild.
So I want to respect your time. I know we've been chatting for a little while. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But
Same.
before I let you go, one thing I want to chat about, which we've been kind of talking around, but I want to directly hit it, is, you mentioned in a post, I was doing a little bit of research earlier just to come up with just a better idea of some talking points that we could explore, but the process of life. And you were talking about it, and there was like a clip of you doing a foot jam tail whip, and like you went over the bars coming in, and it was a couple days ago, maybe a week ago, you posted it, and it gave me this idea of talking about the process of life and how that applies, or I guess the process of BMX and how that applies to life, and vice versa. And I just wanted to see if there was anything you wanted to share on that.
Yeah, I think it was I might have commented on like falling and how it's part of the process. And
Yep.
really the idea was that, like, the idea is that life is everything. It's positive, it's negative, it's everything all at once, yin yang. It's so at that point it's what you focus on. And the idea that there's a saying that you fall forward or you fail forward. So if you're failing, the people that succeed in life, the ones that are winning and ones that are doing good in life, always say fail forward. Like, everyone fails. It's not about failing. Like, you're gonna fail. It's about getting back up and going after your dream or your goal or whatever it is, despite that. And that was kind of the idea, that it's all part of the process. And it's not, the goal is not to do everything perfect and be perfect and always win. It's to do what you want to do, but failing is a part of it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's perception that you, especially with BMX, that you're going to get hurt and there's going to be a problem. But like that fall that I took in that video, I didn't get hurt at all. And it was just, I needed that fall so I could go back and do the trick properly, because I knew what not to do, because I was balanced incorrectly. So like, that fall was important, because now I know how to do that trick better and I won't make that same mistake again. Whereas if I didn't fall at any point in time, I could make that mistake because I wasn't consciously aware of it. I hadn't made it before. I hadn't worked through it. I hadn't understand it. And that's, I try to bring everything that I've ever learned through BMX into life. And it's the same approach into doing anything, like conquering any goal, is that same mentality of like, oh, okay, if it doesn't work out, now I know what not to do because I did this wrong. And now I can, it's not about not accomplishing that goal because you failed, still push past it. Like, you failed and then get back up. Now you know what not to do, keep going. And that's everything I learned through BMX. I just apply that towards life, and it's worked out so far.
I love that, and I agree. That's the same thing I try to do, and I try to see is there's so many profound learnings in BMX that can apply to life that I was never aware of, and the more I become aware of them now, it's like, oh, that makes sense. But like, yeah, just like the perspective on failure or falling and how that deters people from trying again or going after something. And if it wasn't for BMX, I don't think I would have understood the concept around how that's necessary. Like you said, like every time you fall down or you don't accomplish something you set out to do, it teaches your unconscious mind what doesn't work. And if you think openly, you can find those possibilities, especially if you keep trying. So the phrase "fall down once, try twice," something like that. Like it always resonates
Right.
with me, because in BMX, like there's not many times that something works out first try. And when it does, you're stoked. But then
Right.
I'd argue, if you would understand how to get out of that if it went wrong, by doing it first try. So very, very interesting concept.
Absolutely. I think that, like, and that just applies towards everything with life. Like, you see it with, like you were saying, the UFC fighters, the MMA guys, like if they throw a punch and it doesn't work out, they know what not to do. The guy's going to block it. Like, you take those experiences and you get better at it. And you can't really grow unless you're doing those things. You're
Yeah.
not going to be able to. So
Yeah, you need to fuck up. You need to fall. You need to fail in order to grow, and you need to be open to growing. I mean, if you're
yeah,
happy, I mean, then you're winning. So there's nothing to do. But if you're not happy, and if you want to get to another level, like we're humans, we're hardwired to progress, and in order to progress, you have to
for
fall down.
sure. Yeah, I think that a huge problem too, and like personally, I'm definitely working through it, is that like our perception of failing and what that means to me and what that actually means, in my mind, I've always had it identified as a negative thing. That's what you're
Yep.
told, that failing is a bad thing. So you feel that negativity when you fail, when that's wrong. I feel like I fell in that trick. It's not a negative thing. Like, oh, I know what not to do now, so now I can go pull it first try. That's what I'm focused on. The fact that I pulled it the next try, and that's what's important. And it's no longer a failure. I just accomplished it, so I didn't fail. I feel good about myself, and I work through that. And it's that perception that failing's negative, that feeling sucks, like attaching yourself to that negative feeling is a huge part of it. And that's what we need to like reprogram our minds to view it differently.
Yeah, we touched upon this earlier, but I think that's where the external environment comes into play at a young age, because it depends on who is in your life and what's going on and what they're saying, what they're believing, and what's being like what you're modeling, what you're conditioned to believing, and your perspective is built off those things. You know, we think about, we have our parents; those are, most of us are main authority figures, but then we go to school as a child for however many years, and we're with these teachers 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. What are they like? How are they showing up? Like, what are their beliefs? What are their emotions? What are they projecting onto the world? And
Absolutely.
I just thought of that now. Like, that's so crazy, because we would
That's
think that
crazy.
like our guardians or our parents, those are our authority figures, and those are who we model most, but we're not with them as much as we're
A
with
lot.
teachers.
Especially like nowadays, like kids have so much homework and they have other, there's social media, there's extra activities. So like the amount of time that like a teenager really is influenced by their parents and spends time with them is so small these days. It's not like they're spending all day with them. Like you said, like they're in school with teachers and other students too. So like that kid that's in a class with 30 students and one teacher, he's got 31 people influencing how he feels, what he thinks for 8 hours every day. Like, it's not just him and his thoughts and him and his ideas. Like, that's a lot of influence of
Yeah.
outside, like, crazy energy.
And it's not like each one of those kids has a coach to walk them through all of what's happening to them at the same time.
Also, yeah. So it's a recipe for a tough situation.
For sure. Well, I appreciate your time today, Nick. I appreciate the conversation. And before we
Absolutely.
take off, I want to see if you had anything else on your mind that you wanted to share, or maybe we can do another podcast another time. But if there's anything else that you wanted to chat about today.
Not that I can think of. We definitely covered a lot of stuff. I'm sure I'll think of a bunch of stuff as soon as we hang up. But it's been great talking to you, man. It's been a good time.
Yeah, man, it's good to see your face. It's been a minute. I know we talked on the phone about a year ago, and I don't remember. Do you remember the last time we hung out? It had to have been us riding somewhere, but I don't remember.
You were in Denver for that FIS contest
Oh,
a
okay.
couple
So it
years
wasn't too much
ago.
longer ago. It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
that
so that
was
was
4 years ago from
2 or 3.
this month, because I just started seeing my memories from that event pop
All
up
right.
on Facebook.
And even then, like we just kind of rode, but we were both kind of busy riding and doing stuff, and there's so much going on. So like we didn't really have time to catch up or anything or
Yeah,
sit down like
those
this for
events are always
sure.
hectic. But
Yeah.
yeah, man. Well, it's
So
been great. I really appreciate everything
absolutely.
that you do and you stand for, and I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me on this Saturday. And I'm looking
For
forward to
sure,
doing it
man.
again.
I appreciate talking to you, man. And I really enjoy all your content that you put on, because even if like I like to say this, that even if I don't personally like comment or even like a post, like it still can resonate with someone. So when you're posting stuff, like I feel you never know who it's going to affect. Like what one post is going to affect, even if they don't say anything. Like people see things and it resonates. So if just keep up all your content, because it resonates with people and they read it and changes people's perspective, and it's important like right now more than ever.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's funny because like the reason I share is twofold. It's self therapeutic because usually anything I share is something I'm overcoming or working through, but also
For sure.
what helped me get to the place I am in my life was reading other people's content or hearing or seeing and learning the things that they're working through that they had learned that they experienced and how I can apply that to my life. So my intention every time I share is to heal, but also to share with others so that way they can take it and apply it however makes sense. So I appreciate you sharing that.
For sure, man. I think it's the best way to heal too is when you see other people healing themselves and you're like, oh, this actually works. Like
Yeah.
it's seeing it firsthand of what someone else is working through, then you can really like grasp it and figure out what's going on. So
And that was huge for
it's
us in
good.
BMX, being able to observe other people doing tricks, that we never thought
Oh
of. And I
man.
always use Scotty for an example. Those felt videos he was putting out in like 2008 or 9, whatever it was, like those like 30 to 90-second video clips of just absurd tricks that had never been done. He did a tail whip the foot jam in one of them, and I was like, I never thought of that. That works so brilliantly. And I went out and learned it like, 2, 3 weeks later of trying. And
Dude,
so it's just about seeing things and knowing, oh, that person is like me and that's possible. Now I believe that
yeah.
I can do it. So
I mean, since the internet's basically like took off in the last 10 years, like look at the progression of BMX or really anything in life and
yeah.
how much it's changed. Like there's little kids doing flare whips now. Like
I saw
when
a
me
10
and you
year old doing a
started
flare
riding,
bar the other day. 10-year-old doing a
when
flare
you
bar.
we were 10 years old, there was nobody doing flares or bar spins barely. Like it's seeing that it's possible has completely changed people's minds. So it's great.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of my favorite things is sharing the possibility that we all have if we choose to believe in ourselves.
Absolutely, man.
Well, Nic Bonner, man, I appreciate you. I love you, man. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend, and I look
I
forward to
appreciate
speaking
you,
with you
man.
again soon.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks for having me, man. Hope you have a good day.
Thank you. Later.
Take care.